Yes, as I mentioned, the Bible is an interesting piece of text within itself that underpins most, if not the majority, of what we as human beings perceive to be our reality, right? In one sense or another, it underpins a lot of different things, and it's sort of like a time machine, or maybe a placeholder for reality, in one sense or another. And I think that it's very important to understand this because even though there's the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Old Testament itself holds true to the New Testament. So you have to actually understand that the past creates the present, right? That's an important factor in the whole schematics of things. And we also have to take into consideration that the time in which it was brought into inception, these concepts were somewhat fairly new to a degree of one sense or another. Um, we believe that's definitely somewhat relevant to understand going forwards. And so, in this philosophy, with it as a time machine or a description or a manual of time, because what actually happens is that, what Jesus does is that he gives you everything you need to know to understand the different multitudes that exist within reality, but it doesn't actually tell you straightforward as to what's actually happening, nor do all the other people uh, do. So, the New Testament can be seen as an introspection into oneself, whereas the Old Testament is an introspection into the outer world. So, the microcosm and the macrocosm is very important to understand this in order to fully grasp and fully take into consideration what the Bible has to offer, what it is that the Bible may be teaching to us as humanity as a whole. Now, when Cain was banished from the garden, or when he left the garden, in a sense, what we have to take into consideration is that some say that he left with a dog or a four-legged creature to accompany him on his journey, and throughout this period of time, what people need to understand is that that thing being his companion until the point at which he actually met or encountered somebody at the time, um, and during this period of time, there was a lot of genetic engineering actually taking place because there was a lot of high level technology available at the time, though it's strictly incomprehensible at present. Though there was that validation taking place in relation to the human consciousness. So his consciousness was actually altered to be dog-like, to be beast-like, by this thing, which would have also inhibited or bonded with him and it, in one sense or another. And if you also look at the story of Gilgamesh, you'd actually come to understand that Gilgamesh had a friend who was a beast as well, or who had a beast-like nature, similar to how Cain, his consciousness would have been actually altered throughout this process, and also that higher technology being available at that time would have enabled Cain to actually breed or have a form of human that is unlike our present self, through a form of genetic engineering, through working with higher level beings or higher beings of consciousness, and him also seeing a likeness to this creature to him would have definitely put him in that position to want to actually undertake in that particular experimentation, given the ability or given the opportunity by higher level uh, or higher beings of a higher level of awareness. So we see genetic engineering being available through papyrus, through the stories of Egypt, which again is a fair. Because you know what, people really have to come to ask themselves, how did this place become buried under sand? And not a lot of people can actually come to begin to grasp that, or even to even begin to understand that. But that's a big thing to this mystery that underpins most of us. So yeah, so that's it in relation to Cain, and also so that mindset is embedded in some aspects through the consciousness and the closeness to the etheric nature, um, or to the etheric realm, from the physical, because it was much closer, and our being was more connected to that, and so there would have been that particular bond that would have then enabled that fruition to come into manifestation, or into his also mental state. And having that understanding would have also, like, been passed on through generation and generation, whether be it genetically or or um or mentally. That's very important to understand. Though also there was also higher level beings available at that time that would have had the extra ability to grant these abilities that are beyond our scope of understanding. So yeah, so that's that. But then again, the thing that's important to understand here, that Jesus had to make us aware of, was that even though he done all these miracles and he stated all these things, he doesn't go above, like Deuteronomy. So if you really look at the metaphysics of the book, it demonstrates a lot as relation to the fundamental aspects of reality and the way that it is composed. These limits and capabilities, and regardless of these things, you were still limited to the power of Deuteronomy. Like the Deuteronomy, it doesn't go above that Deuteronomy teachings, and knowing, nor does he go above the Old Testament in one sense or another. And over time, we've all lost this meaning, around that. And we see in as time progresses, we see so much within it. So, for example, you've got the book of Leviticus, where the book goes into genealogy, right? And that's also relevant because, as the universe becomes untangled, you start to see why that's important, why that record is being kept, and that whole concept of bloodlines and things of that nature. That's all relevant stuff, because again, at the same time, it underpins a lot of when the nature of reality becomes impure. So they talk about how people were trying to corrupt Jesus' bloodline, how he was going to be of a particular bloodline, how he was going to be born of a particular bloodline. All those things I have to take into consideration, because again, for him, why would that be important? Why all those things that would be relevant, and here's the thing where the corruption starts to come in, because there's ways of cleaning that. But as we do that, that's when you see people start to then reference the bloodline, so that they can keep the world they knew within a particular consciousness in place, so that it can somewhat continue to flourish in one nature or another, which is beyond obvious comprehension. Because again, we're abused so much by demons. Like, sometimes you stand there and you will lose neurological, you'll feel yourself losing neurons, and you won't understand what it is, but you're actually being manipulated by demonic creatures and entities. And and when we do these wipings, these things, right, considering the ark and whatever, we check and we verify what the original state of the world is. And and if we go somewhere and we find out that you weren't there, or that something wasn't there, or a set of people, like bro, it becomes a madness, right? It becomes a pure madness, right? Because we can use these things to check and to verify the authenticity of the world that we currently inhabit, right? And whether or not a world should be destroyed, or it shouldn't be destroyed, right? All these things come into fruition, right? And there's levels to it, there's authorizations and things of that nature, which is another thing that comes to time, right? So you hear things, right? Like in seances and things of that nature, people take into consideration authorization, right? Accounting and authentication, right? All these things are very valuable, and they're also very immensely valuable within the spiritual realm. But not only that, also within time in itself, right? That's very important. Now, when it comes to Jesus, the racial context behind him is not really that relevant, because again, I think that we always gear things around intention, because the world we live in today is not the current world that the world is actually at, because a lot of people take this word but they don't know how to use it. They don't know how to value it. We've all seen the case of Dante's Inferno, which was a gimmickal story, but it had some essence to it, some value to it. And when we take that value, we incorporate it into what we understand and what we know. And even though demonic entities may try to inhibit and take our actual mentality, because we feel it, like personally, like if you feel yourself losing neurons, or at least personally from my point of view, there's aspects to it, but I feel that like some concepts shouldn't be that highly focused on, in essence. So that's important, because again, there's a lot of things that we don't know, but there are things that are made aware to us, and it's just coming to that knowledge and that fruition. And there's so much that's hidden but in plain sight that we can fix, but we can take our time to do so. And I think that's that. There's not really a rush to anything. Even like, I don't know if the Victorian period was a true era, but they used the Bible in that period as well. So Bible is used a lot for justification. And I think that a lot of the times, if you listen to people preaching, or people actually looking at it from different countries, different regions, without any outside influence, you'd be amazed at what you'd actually learn, the things that you'd uncover. So that's also very important, because sometimes it can be used to actually bring you down spiritually, and anchor you to a lower realm, when in essence it's actually meant to enlighten and raise you up above what it actually is. So that's all very relevant, very important. Perception and perspective is key to overall everything. So when you come across people that lean a lot on public opinion, rather than public's emotional value, then you sort of come to inhibit things. But these people are kind of like lawyers, in a sense, to put it plain and simply. That's what they pretty much are, and that's what they underpin in most of what we see, not only in today's world, but overall. They really do sort of like, Jesus is sort of like a lawyer to yourselves. But if he really died for you, then I don't know, man, why did the guy rise again? I think that's always a question to take into consideration. And there's so little that we don't know nor understand over time, and there's so much that people use to manipulate and abuse us over time. But we always take the case, or the knowledge of not knowing, not having a proper understanding, and we use that to strengthen ourselves in the present moment within the singular reality that we understand, and then we move forwards from that way, right? Because again, at the same time, demonic creatures are real. Entities are. If you haven't come to that realization yet, then you have to come into that knowledge, into that understanding, and people are abused over time. And I think that's pretty much it, really. I know that there's definitely more that I wanted to cover, but I don't really write these things down, and I just go off the top of my head as I discuss and I speak about things. Um, so it's quite difficult, but again, the Bible is a time machine. It's quite difficult because you have to cross-reference a lot of things to get to the point. But it has everything that one would ever need to understand in order to operate reality in each phase. And these things about secreting chemicals in the brain, that's also relevant in order to reach a level of comfort. And yeah, and that's pretty much it, really. And it's just, we live a life where we hope that people are not abused in their actions and intentions. And that's the reality. That's the reality we live in, basically, in a sense. And it's much better than what people imagine it to be. Because the people that actually hold and follow this book are the cause for some of the major catastrophes that we've seen in this world. So if they're not able to create and build this world as it should be, or to the best of its value, then what's really going on? And I don't think that Jesus will be there to save anyone when the time really comes to it. I don't know. I can't really say anything about that, but I think most people are pretty much. It's complicated, but yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I might talk about this another time, or perform a reference of it, but rather, let's not get fixated or lose the point here. There's deep esoteric meaning and much that is hidden within that has been brought to light. And always use it as a guidebook as you move through this reality, and you would have a better understanding of the mechanics and things that underpin most, if not everything, that we experience in this world. If not in this universe, because yeah, man, it's crazy.